What's gotten into that boy?
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. This is part 10 of a proper investigation, exploration into the original 156 Twilight Zone episodes. So the Twilight Zone is an incredibly famous and phenomenal show that ran from 1959 to 1964, and I've been going through every single episode, 6 episodes at a time, so that by the end of this little run I'll have 26 videos on here, all looking at every episode of the Twilight Zone. So this is part 10, so that we're part way into season 2, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Mr. Dingle the Strong. And Mr. Dingle the Strong starts with this opening narration. Uniquely American institution known as the Neighborhood Bar. Reading left to right are Mr. Anthony O'Toole, proprietor, who waters his drinks like geraniums but who stands 4 square for peace and quiet and for booze for ladies. This is Mr. Joseph J. Callahan, an unregistered bookie, whose entire life is any sporting event with 2 sides and a set of odds. His idea of a meeting at the summit is any dialogue between a catcher and a pitcher with more than one man on base. And this animated citizen is every anonymous bettor who ever dropped rent money on a horse race or a prize fight or a floating crap game, and who took out his frustrations and his insolvency on any vulnerable fellow barstool companion within arms and fists reach. And this is Mr. Luther Dingle, a vacuum cleaner salesman whose volume of business is roughly that of a valet at a hobo convention. He is a consummate failure in almost everything, but is a good listener and has a prominent jaw. And these 2 unseen gentlemen are visitors from outer space. They are about to alter the destiny of Luther Dingle by leaving him a legacy, the kind you can't hardly find no more. In just a moment, a sad-faced perennial punching bag who missed even the caboose of life's gravy train will take a short constitutional into that most unpredictable region that we refer to as the Twilight Zone. Mr. Dingle the Strong is written by Rod Serling, and it's another appearance by Burgess Meredith, who appeared in a few episodes. And I love Burgess Meredith. He's one of my favourite actors, and he's fantastic in this story. It's a comedy. It's much lighter than some of the Twilight Zone episodes. I'd say in general, they don't do comedy very often, but they did do it sometimes. And this is definitely a very light-hearted story. Although, even though it's very light-hearted, the bullying this in the episode is pretty harsh, I'd say, and it's quite blatantly on screen. And you do feel a lot of sympathy for Mr. Dingle, played by Burgess Meredith. And he's frequently getting bullied by a character that's actually played by Don Rickles. And Don Rickles must have been a name by then, because he's seen as a special guest star in the credits. So that's quite cool. But Don Rickles plays this horrible man that's treating Mr. Dingle really badly and keeps punching him. And he's like, you know, like proper, like intimidating him, mocking him, and being violent with him. And these aliens appear from Mars. They reveal later on they're from Mars, and they want to see what happens if they give super strength to a human, to see what happens. And they decide that Mr. Dingle is a good candidate for it, so they give him this like immense amount of strength, like 3 times the amount of strength that a man would normally have. And once he realizes he's got that strength, he uses it almost to become a celebrity and like sort of parlor tricks kind of thing. And it develops from there, and it's just funny, and it's interesting. You know, it's beautifully played by Burgess Meredith, and there's a really odd ending where these other aliens come in. They're clearly played by kids, and they're from Venus, and they try something else. It's a really odd episode in a lot of ways, but I thought it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, so it's definitely a plus one. And actually, this little batch is a very positive batch. There's a lot of good stories here. So yeah, Mr. Dingle the Strong is a good start to this little batch. And then there's Static, which is a story by Charles Beaumont. Okay, so Static starts with this opening narration. And no one ever saw one quite like that, because that's a very special sort of radio. In its day, circa 1935, its type was one of the most elegant consoles on the market. Now, with its fabric-covered speakers, its peculiar yellow dial, its serrated knobs, it looks quaint and a little strange. Mr. Ed Lindsay is going to find out how strange very soon, when he tunes into the Twilight Zone. So, Static is a story that was written by Charles Beaumont, based on a short story that was written by O.C. Rich. And it's a really beautifully done, sensitive story, kind of about nostalgia and about memory, about not letting go, about the romanticization of your past, and about radio. It's a really lovely, touching story. But also, another thing that I found quite interesting in the story was there was also this relationship that was clearly a dead relationship that wasn't kind of helped by what was happening in the Twilight Zone as well. So the plot of this one is this old man discovers this radio, and he gets all excited about it. And basically, the radio plays broadcasts from the past as if it's the present day. So it's kind of like stepping back in time through this radio. And this man gets absolutely obsessed with it. So, as is often the case in the Twilight Zone, this is a story about obsession. And his wife is like standing by the side saying, you know, hello, our relationship is gone to the dogs and this is not helping at all, you know. And she's sort of helpless, seeing this obsession get worse and worse and worse. And it just features some really lovely, sensitive, subtle acting from everybody involved. It's a really nice episode that is really successful. So the next one is a story called Prime Mover. The Prime Mover starts with this opening narration. Portrait of a man who thinks and thereby gets things done. Mr. Jimbo Cobb might be called a prime mover, a talent which has to be seen to be believed. In just a moment, he'll show his friend and you how he keeps both feet on the ground and his head in the Twilight Zone. Okay, Prime Mover is also written by Charles Beaumont, and this has an appearance by Buddy Ebsen. So there's two main characters in this, and one of them is played by Buddy Ebsen, who you might know from the Beverly Hillbillies. He ended up being very famous for that, but he was a very successful actor in his own right anyway, in general. But he does this really sympathetic character who has this telekinetic ability, and his mate finds out about it, and his mate totally exploits him. His mate is a fantastic performance from Dane Clark. Absolutely brilliant performance, and really kind of sets the screen alight with all of what he's doing on in this story. Really, really good. So he's kind of like the fire in the belly of this episode, this performance from Dane Clark, playing this man who desperately wants to not struggle with money anymore, and he discovers that he can exploit his mate's telekinetic powers, and he does this through gambling, and he gets worse and worse. Again, he gets like obsessed with it. He wants to kind of be really greedy with it as well, and he just takes him over. And again, he's ignoring his fiance, and she's kind of left aside, saying, you know, don't. This is not right. Don't do this. What about us? And all that. And actually, it's got a really nice ending that you wouldn't expect, and it has got a resolve to it that is positive, but also sends a message about obsession and about reining it in and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, Prime Mover is a really good episode that nobody really talks about much. So definitely one of the good ones, I think. Okay, so the next one is a really unusual one, which was quite shocking to watch, which was called Long Distance Call. And Long Distance Call starts with this opening narration. As must be obvious, this is a house hovered over by Mr. Death, that omnipresent player to the third and final act of every life. And it's been said, and probably rightfully so, that what follows this life is one of the most unfathomable mysteries, an area of darkness which we, the living, reserve for the dead. Or so it is said. For in a moment, a child will try to cross that bridge which separates light and shadow, and of course he must take the only known route, that indistinct highway through the region we call the Twilight Zone. So Long Distance Call was a story that was credited to Charles Beaumont, and he did write a treatment of it, but it was written by 2 other people as well. So he kind of like finalized the last bit of it, and it's a story that is quite shocking and uncomfortable to watch. And I was watching it just absolutely aghast, thinking, I can't believe this is happening. And if I tell you what happens without telling you ending, so that it doesn't spoil it, it kind of gives you the idea of how shocking it is that this is happening in the episode. So it starts off with a child's birthday, a 5-year-old's birthday, and the boy playing the 5-year-old is actually Bill Mumy. So Bill Mumy became very famous as Will Robinson in Lost in Space, and then became a big part of my life as Lanier in Babylon 5. And actually, I'm generally a massive fan of Bill Mumy, and I've got his albums as well, because he's a really good musician and songwriter as well. So I'm a big, I'm a big fan of Bill Mumy, and he's a bit of an inspiration for me in a lot of ways. But anyway, he was famous as a kid, and this is one of the things he did. He was in two Twilight Zone episodes, this and a mega famous one called It's a Good Life, but we'll get to It's a Good Life as it comes up in the schedule. But this one called Long Distance Call, he's this 5-year-old boy who's got his birthday, and his nan, or his grandma, as it said in the story, his grandma is all over him. It's a really weird relationship where she says later on that she sees him as her son, because her son got old and she lost her son to another woman, and now he's her son, and the boy is really receptive to it, and he's also got this weird relationship with the grandma, on like reciprocating it, and it's really odd. So it sets it up really odd anyway, and she doesn't care about the other present. She just wants him to open the present from her, and she keeps talking about the fact she's gonna die, and she's bought him a phone, and when she dies, he can contact her via this toy phone that he's got. And it's the Twilight Zone. So clearly, she does die very quickly in the episode, and she's talking to him on the phone through this toy phone. But what is really, really like shocking and desperately sad and horrible to watch, she's trying to persuade him to commit suicide. She's saying, come over and stay with me. On the phone, on his toy phone. She goes, come over and stay with me. And he actually tries to commit suicide. He fails. His parents are desperately frightened and upset by it all. And at first they're like, what are you talking about? That's not your grandma on the phone. It's a toy phone. There's no one on the other end. And then they realise, the mum realises that actually it is the grandma's voice on the other side of the phone trying to persuade him to commit suicide. Which was big, very, very heavy, and fantastic performances by the mum and dad, Philip Abbott and Patricia Smith. Really good performances. There's a lot of sensitivity in the script. I mean, it is clearly a very sensitive subject, but it's handled really well, and their performances are so good. And I won't tell you exactly what's happening in the dialogue of the last scene, but the last scene requires lots of acting chops from Philip Abbott, the main guy, the father in the story. He does it so well. He's got a big speech, and he's pleading for his son's life. It's so well done, and just a real testament to the kind of quality of acting you get in the Twilight Zone. But yeah, it's really shocking how the plot is so disturbing and frightening, and it's all about a kid, 5-year-old boy being persuaded to commit suicide. So yeah, long distance call, a very unique episode, really. So the next one in this run of 6 episodes is 100 yards above the rim. 100 yards over the rim starts with this opening narration. The year is 1847. The place is the territory of New Mexico. The people are a tiny handful of men and women with a dream. 11 months ago, they started out from Ohio and headed west. Someone told them about a place called California, about a warm sun and a blue sky, about rich land and fresh air. And at this moment, almost a year later, they've seen nothing but cold, heat, exhaustion, hunger, and sickness. This man's name is Christian Horn. He has a dying 8-year-old son and a heart-sick wife, and he is the only one remaining who has even a fragment of the dream left. Mr. Chris Horn, who's going over the top of a rim to look for water and sustenance, and in a moment will move into the Twilight Zone. 100 Yards Above the Rim is written by Rod Serling, and it's a great classic kind of Twilight Zone situation that involves time travel again. There's lots of these sort of situations, and the main character is played by Cliff Robertson, who's already a very famous actor, and he does this sort of very confused, sensitive, vulnerable man really well. So it's very compelling to watch from the point of view that you do have a lot of sympathy for him. And there's actually a little cameo appearance at the beginning from John Astin. So John Astin, you may know in many things he's done, but especially as Gomez in the Addams Family. So he'd be cast as Gomez 4 years after this appearance. So it's before he did that. But he has this little part at the beginning. And anyway, it starts off in the mid-1800s, and it's like a western setting, and there's a wagon trail where they're desperately hungry and thirsty, and the family have got this boy that's really ill and potentially dying. They think he could be dying. They desperately want some help, but they seem to be in the middle of nowhere, and they are so far away from a town, and they're just really worried about their health, but especially this little boy's health. And anyway, the father says, look, we'll just stop here. I'm going to go ahead because I might be able to do it faster, and I'm going to look over the hill. And he kind of reassures them and says, I am sure there's going to be some help over the ridge, right? Over the hill, above the rim, to quote the title. And yeah, it's the Twilight Zone. There is help, but that help comes from a future set of characters that a little bit freaked out when he says that he's from 1860 something, and they're like, what? But they do help him out, and it's just really cool the way it plays out. And it's just one of those great time travel stories. Really good performance from Cliff Robertson. You don't really know where it's going to go, and yeah, it's I think it's a really strong episode written by Rod Serling. And then the last one in this little batch is the Rip Van Winkle Caper. The Rip Van Winkle Caper. And the Rip Van Winkle Caper begins with this opening narration. The time is now, and the place is a mountain cave in Death Valley, USA. In just a moment, these 4 men will utilize the services of a truck placed in Cosmoline, loaded with a hot heist called off by a century of sleep, and then take a drive into the Twilight Zone. Okay, the Rip Van Winkle Caper is written by Rod Serling, and I think it's one of the best stories. I think it's fantastic. It's another one of those epic stories that feels like it's far longer than it actually is, because so much happens. It's so deeply woven. The characters are really quite developed for such a small amount of time. The message, or the social commentary, if you like, or the comment on humanity anyway, the way we act, is really strong. It's a really good story. So basically, and at the centre of this, I think, is a fantastic performance by Oscar Baregi Jr., who does appear in another one later on. Really another great performance later on. But this story he's like really cocky at the beginning, and then by the end of it, he's got this sort of desperate nature to his performance, which is brilliant. So he's really at the center of how strong this episode is. So I'll tell you what it's about. So these thieves steal all this gold. They successfully steal the gold, but they're worried about being caught. So part of the plan, which was created by the character played by Oscar Baregi Jr. Apologies for the pronunciation if it's wrong. Part of his plan is for them to go into suspended animation for 100 years and wake up in a time when they won't have any issues with being caught or being looked for, because too much time would have passed, no one would have cared anymore, and they can then just enjoy the gold. That's the idea, but it doesn't go according to plan. They do actually successfully go in 100 years into the future, so they do sleep for 100 years. They wake up again, but what you've got is two things that happen. You've got this fantastic setup where if you've got any amount of stolen money by a group of people that are supposed to be dealing with this together, distrust and selfishness rears its ugly head, and it all goes wrong, right? Great stories like that. There's the story A Simple Plan, which was made into a great film. There's there's all sorts of stories. No Country for Old Men has got the same kind of plot. This is slightly different because they're not being chased by anybody. They basically implode amongst each other, and it's really, really good the way that plays out, and very realistic. You can see that sort of thing happening. But then also, the other thing, which I won't reveal to you, because in case you watch it, it'll be too big a spoiler, but there's a really awesome extra comment on what they've done based around what the situation is 100 years later. It's really, really good. It's a lovely little twist that is an extra poke at the thieves, and it's an extra way that the Twilight Zone twists a knife into what they've done. Brilliant. It's a really good episode. The Rip Van Winkle Caper, obviously riffing off the idea from the original story about Rip Van Winkle sleeping for 100 years and waking up. Similar kind of thing, but this time the idea was that they were doing it to avoid the law. But yeah, but it all goes wrong. So a great way to finish that batch of stories. And season 2 is rattling along at a really good pace. There's some really strong stories coming up, and this one had some classics, also the really disturbing Long Distance Call, and yeah, really nice strong set of episodes. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Stay curious, everybody. Picture of what it's like to be